Hello, my name is Donovan Fobbs, and I am part of Berkeley's National Honor Society Social Studies Committee. And as part of our committee project this year, I'm going to give you a little tidbit of history. My tidbit for you is about the historical significance and origins of the novel The Three Musketeers. The Three Musketeers is a French historical adventure novel written by French author Alexandre Dumas in the year 1844. It is set in the early 1600s, and it recounts the adventures of a young man named D'Artagnan, and he leaves home to join the musketeers of the guard. Along the way, he is joined by famous musketeer trio Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, commonly known as the Three Musketeers, and they all become involved in the affairs of state and at the court. The historical significance is because it is actually based off of the real-life musketeer Charles de Batz-Casimir d'Artagnan, who is the historical basis of the character D'Artagnan. Charles de Batz-Casimir d'Artagnan, also known as Count D'Artagnan, was a real-life musketeer who served Louis XIV as captain of the Musketeer Guard during his reign. He died at the siege of Maastricht and served in the Franco-Dutch War, where he sadly died. Because he was fictionalized so often by authors, his fictional self is more famous actually than his real self. Regardless, his importance to the French military history, and as well as popularization of the musketeers in general, cannot be overstated. His counterpatriots, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, were also based off of real-life musketeers that Dumas had read about in the French Royal Library. And while the historical setting of the novel is important and interesting, the setting of when the novel was written is even more so. Dumas first printed and serialized the book from March to July in the year 1844, during the July Monarchy, only 4 years before the French Revolution would take place, establishing the Second Republic. During this time, Dumas actually was playing to both the Republicans and the monarchists. The monarchists because of his glorification and romanticization of serving king and country and dying in battle for one's monarch. The Republicans because of his criticism of the old regime and the corruption that took place. Dumas knew that he was playing to both these parties and included in a way in which he did not upset either party. This book should be remembered as a historically significant novel which portrays not only the opinions of pre-French Revolution France, but also the time of Louis XIV and his father, and showed what the military life was like at that time period and what the opinions were or may have been of those who were in that time period. Overall, the book itself is as intriguing as the period it represents. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new about France and the setting of pre-French Revolution France. Thank you for listening, and this was Donovan Fobbs as part of the Social Studies Committee project. Thank you so much.
Hello, I am going to talk about both the start and the end of World War II. First, you start off up here when Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, which was the official start of World War II between England, France being the Allies, and then Italy, Germany/Austria, and Japan being the Axis powers. There was war between the two forces, and then Germany entered Paris in 1940, which then France became an Axis state, pretending to be allies, but joining, but saying that they joined the Axis powers, which showed power towards the Axis. But then Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which made the United States enter the war, as they had already been sending supplies to both England and France during the war, but this was the official entry on December 7th, 1941, when the United States joined the war on the Allied side. that was these mark the start of World War II. Now moving on to the end of World War II. First of all, you have VE Day, which was May 8th, 1945. It was when the Allies won in Europe after the Battle of the Bulge. We pushed all forces in, and on May 5th, that's when Adolf Hitler killed himself, which marked the end of Germany, and then it eventually led to Germany surrendering and Europe collapse, the Axis Europe collapsing. Here you have another picture, one of the most famous pictures at the end of World War II, that being to celebrate the soldiers coming home. And then here you have the surrender of Japan. This is General MacArthur, and this is the Emperor of Japan at the time. This was to show that MacArthur was superior to the Japanese Empire and the military forces. On August 12th, which was the bombing of Hiroshima. After that, on August 14th, the Japan surrendered. This represents these three images represent the biggest win for freedom around the world. And these three images or newspapers regard one of the biggest upsets and horrible events to follow, being the Holocaust due to Germany, Japan leading many experiments on POWs, and Germany and France, which helped with Germany took Parisian and French Jewish people to concentration and extermination camps. So three very bad and significant parts of the start of World War II, and three amazing endings of World War II. Thank you very much.
Grace O'Malley by Nicholas Miller. Grace O'Malley, also known as the Pirate Queen or Grambell, was a 16th century Irish pirate who became famous for her staunch support of Irish independence from Britain. Born in Clew Bay, County Mayo, to an upper middle class family, which had most of its fortune come from piracy, she developed a love of the sea from a young age. Her family's motto was Terra Marqui Potens, which translates to valiant by land or sea. One event from her early life that made it into folklore was how, after being told she couldn't join her father on a trading expedition, O'Malley chopped off her hair, disguised herself as a boy, and snuck aboard. This also earned her the nickname Grian Mahol, which can be roughly translated to Grace the Bald. O'Malley was married 2 times in her life, first at the age of 15 to Donald O. Flaithsbaharai, then Richard Bourke at 36. Both marriages served to further Grace and her family financially and grow her fleet of ships, something she was famously proud of. Maho's first marriage to Donald Ad Shogair O Flaithsbaharai produced 3 children and ended with her husband's death, which was the result of a power struggle between Donald and Clan Joyce. While her husband was killed, Grace did manage to force Clan Joyce to retreat before moving with her fortune to County Mayo and building a castle on Clare Island. Her second and final marriage to Richard Bourke resulted in a 4th child. They'd been married for a year before, as legend has it. Grace shouted through her window, "Richard Bourke, I just miss you." And while they remained officially married, they were more friendly exes and co-parents after that. Possibly the most famous legend of O'Malley has to do with the birth of her fourth son, Tivatvork. It tells that she gave birth to him during an attack on her ship by corsairs, and then got right up and led her outnumbered and outgunned crew to victory against the pirates. Grace took up leadership of the O'Malley clan after her father passed away, making her a very rare sight in 17th century Ireland. She was so respected by her first husband's men that they continued to serve under her even after his death. And that first husband's marriage resulted in a very important alliance between the families. In response to England levying heavy taxes on the Irish people, O'Malley started charging her own pirate taxes to passing ships. These taxes were basically the act of charging protection money, as if a ship refused to pay, they were promptly raided. Richard Bingham was the British governor of Western Ireland and had a rivalry with O'Malley for many years. It's not exactly clear to historians how they first came to be in each other's sights, but he famously thought of her as a nurse to all rebellions in the province for this 40 years. Another famous action of O'Malley was making the Queen of England give in to her demands. She sailed to the Queen to get help with Bingham. He had taken 2 of Grace's sons as captives, and O'Malley wanted them released. Despite refusing to bow before the Queen, Grace did indeed end up getting her sons freed, as well as provisions for all 3 of them. Like all of Ireland, O'Malley eventually fell to the English. Aware that her clan was no match for the English powers, she slowly was absorbed into them, but still encouraged and supported resistance in secret, and helped the Irish in this capacity during the 9 Years' War. While the location and date of her death is disputed, it's believed she died at Rockfleet Castle around 1603, the same year as Queen Elizabeth I's death.
Is about the invention of the telephone. I chose the telephone because it revolutionized human communication. People no longer needed to be in the same room to talk to each other and communicate. This was super important because it allowed ideas to be spread faster, which helped other people make great inventions. The inventor of the telephone was Alexander Graham Bell. His interest in sound technology was deep-rooted and personal, as both his wife and mother were deaf. While there's some controversy over whether Bell was the true pioneer of the telephone, he secured exclusive rights to the technology and launched the Bell Telephone Company in 1877. Ultimately, the talented scientist held more than 18 patents for his inventions in working communications. Alexander Graham Bell was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on March 3, 1847. Bell's father was a professor of speech allocation at the University of Edinburgh, and his mother, despite being deaf, was an accomplished pianist. Young Alexander was an intellectually curious child who studied piano and began inventing things at an early age. Both of his brothers passed away from tuberculosis by the time Bell was in his early 20s. Education. Initially, Bell's education consisted of homeschooling. Bell didn't excel academically, but he was a problem solver from an early age. When he was just 12, young Alexander invented a device with rotating paddles and nail brushes that could quickly remove husks from wheat grain to help improve a farming process. At age 16, Bell began studying the mechanics of speech. He went on to attend Royal High School and the University of Edinburgh. In 1870, Bell, along with his family, moved to Canada. The following year, he settled in the United States. While in the United States, Bell implemented a system his father developed to teach deaf children called visible speech, a set of symbols that represented speech sounds. In 1872, he opened the School of Vocal Physiology and Mechanics of Speech in Boston, where deaf people were taught to speak. At age 26, the budding inventor became a professor of vocal physiology and allocation at the Boston University School of Oratory. even though he didn't have a university degree. While teaching, Bell met Mabel Hubbard, a deaf student. The couple married on July 11th, 1877. They went on to have 4 children, including 2 sons who died as infants. When was the telephone invented? In 1871, Bell started working on the harmonic telegraph, a device that allowed multiple messages to be transmitted over a wire at the same time. While trying to perfect this technology, which was backed by a group of investors, Bell became preoccupied with finding a way to transmit human voice over wires. By 1875, Bell, with the help of his partner Thomas Watson, had come up with a simple receiver that could turn electricity into sound. Other scientists, such as Antonio Meucci and Elisha Gray, were working on similar technologies, and there's some debate over who should be credited with the invention of the telephone. It's said that Bell raced to the patent office to be the first to secure the rights to the discovery. On March 7th, 1876, Bell was granted his telephone patent. A few days later, he made the first ever telephone call to Watson, allegedly uttering the now famous phrase, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." By 1877, the Bell Telephone Company, which is today known as AT&T, was created. In 1915, Bell made the first transcontinental phone call to Watson from New York City to San Francisco. Did you know Alexander Graham Bell refused to have a telephone in his study, fearing it would distract him from his scientific work? The invention of the telephone caused many legal headaches. Bell faced nearly 20-year legal battle with other scientists, including Gray and Rucci, who claimed they created telephone prototypes prior to Bell's patent. His patent shown here. In 1887, the U.S. government moved to withdraw the patent issued to Bell, but after a series of rulings, the Bell Company won in a Supreme Court decision. While the Bell Company faced over 50 court challenges, in the end, none were successful. In addition to the cell phone, Bell worked on hundreds of projects throughout his career and received patents in various fields. Here are some other telephone facts. When Alexander Graham Bell died in 1922, all telephones stopped ringing for 1 full minute as a tribute to the creator. Mark Twain was one of the first people to have a phone in his home, and there are roughly 150 million telephone lines in the world, a number that increases by thousands daily.
Hi, my name is Amanda Horowitz, and this is my committee project about the telephone. So a telephone is an instrument designed for the simultaneous transmission and reception of the human voice. The telephone is inexpensive, is simple to operate, and offers its users an immediate personal type of communication that cannot be obtained through any other medium. And as a result, it has become the most widely used telecommunication device in the world. Billions of telephones are in use around the world. Since invention of the transistor in 1947, metal wiring and other heavy hardware have been replaced by lightweight and compact microcircuitry. Advances in electronics have improved the performance of the basic design, and they've also allowed the introduction of a number of smart features such as automatic redialing, call number identification, wireless transmission, and visual data display. The telephone instrument is made up of the following functional components: a power source, a switch hook, a dialer, a ringer, a transmitter, a receiver, and an anti-side tone circuit. Beginning in the early 19th century, several inventors made a number of attempts to transmit sound by electric means. The first inventors to suggest that sound can be transmitted electrically was Frenchman Charles Bourseul, who indicated that a diaphragm making and breaking contact with an electrode might be used for this purpose. In the 1850s, Italian-American inventor Antonio Meucci had electrical devices in his home called the teletrophone that he used to communicate between rooms, though he did not patent his inventions. The transmitter in the teletrophone employed consisted of a membrane with a metallic strip that would intermittently contact a metallic point connected to an electrical circuit. As sound waves impinged on the membrane, making the membrane vibrate, the circuit would be connected and interpreted at the same rate as the frequency of the sound. The fluctuating electric current thus generated would be transmitted by wire to a receiver, which consisted of an iron needle that was surrounded by the coil of an electromagnet and connected to a sounding box. The fluctuating electric current would generate vary magnetic fields in the coil, and these in turn would force the iron needle to produce vibrations in the sound box. Alexander Graham Bell, best known for his invention of the telephone, revolutionized communication as we know it. His interest in sound technology was deep-rooted and personal, as both his wife and mother were deaf. In 1876 through 1877, a new invention called the telephone emerged. Historians are not sure who the inventor was. Both Alexander Graham Bell and Alicia Gray submitted independent patent applications concerning telephones to the Patent Office in Washington on February 14, 1876. Gray's first device was the use of a harmonic telegraph, the transmitter and receiver of which consisted of a set of metallic reeds turned to different frequencies. As electromagnetic coil was located near each of the reeds, which a reed in the transmitter was vibrated by sound waves of its resonant frequency. Bell's patent was approved and officially registered on March 7th, and 3 days later, the famous call is said to have been made when Bell summoned his assistant, Mr. Watson, and said, "Come here, I want to see you," confirmed that his invention worked. Bell's interest in telephones came through his mother, who was deaf, and his father, Alexander Bell, who was a teacher of elocution, famous for the phonetic transcription system he had developed to help the deaf learn to speak. But many others had been already pursuing the idea of a telephone for years. A resolution of the U.S. House of Representatives in June 2002 claimed that Bell had nefariously acquired and exploited an apparatus, the telephono, invented by Antonio Meucci long before Bell and Gray. Bell presented the telephone before a large audience for the first time at the World Exhibit in Philadelphia in June 1876. The first version of Bell's telephone, as was described in the patent application, was not suitable for practical purposes. Only after a relative thorough reconstruction, to quote Hemmings Johansson, could a telephone be designed for a large-scale production. The Bell Telephone Company began operating on July 11, 1877. In the same month, the first usable Bell telephone arrived in Europe to be presented in Plymouth to the British Association. Now to go deeper into Bell's process. In 1871, Bell started working on the harmonic telegraph, a device that allowed multiple messages to be transmitted over wire at the same time. While trying to perfect this technology, which was backed by a group of investors, Bell became preoccupied with finding a way to transmit human voice over wires. In 1875, with the help of his partner Thomas Watson, he had come up with a simple receiver that could turn electricity into sound. By 1877, the Bell Telephone Company, which today is known as AT&T, was created. In 1915, Bell made the first transcontinental phone call to Watson from New York City to San Francisco. The poor performance of early telephone transmitters prompted a number of investors to pursue further work in this area. Among them was Thomas Edison, whose 1886 design for a voice transmitter consisted of a cavity filled with granules of carbonized anthracite coal. Edison's carbon transmitter was sufficiently simple, effective, cheap, and durable that it became the basis for standard telephone transmitters designed through the 1970s. The earliest telephone instrument to see common use was introduced by Charles Williams Jr. in 1882. Designed for wall mounting, this instrument consisted of a ringer, a hand crank magneto for generating a ring voltage and distant instrument, a hand receiver, a switch hook, a transmitter, and various versions of this telephone were used.
Hello, welcome to my part of the Social Studies Committee project for NHS. This year, the committee decided to make a YouTube channel that had a bunch of videos of people talking about their favorite historical place or event or invention or time in history. And I knew that I wanted to share an event that I felt was personally important to me, which is why I came upon the Stonewall riots, which are an extremely important part of LGBTQ history that is often overlooked in American history classes. Before we can talk about what the Stonewall riots were and why they were important, we need to have some context. So, in the 60s, when this happened, same-sex relationships were illegal in New York City, and a lot of LGBTQ people had to go to gay and lesbian bars to seek acceptance. New York City police would often shut down these bars that were catering to these communities under the guise of, illegal activity, even if there was none actually occurring other than same-sex relationships, and these bars would often have their liquor licenses revoked because of the clientele that they served. And though these policies reversed through the late 60s, there was obviously still a lot of heavy animosity towards the LGBTQ community, something that has pervaded through to this day, but was a lot more prevalent in the 60s. Now, what was the Stonewall Inn? The Stonewall Inn, like a lot of gay bars of the time, was actually owned by the mafia. It was once a straight club, and then it was converted to a gay bar, and it was located in the Greenwich Village of NYC. and it was known as a gathering place for the LGBTQ community, and it was one of the few gay bars in the area where patrons were actually allowed to dance, which is obviously an expression of joy and happiness. And this bar was subject to routine police raids on suspicion of illegal activity, partially because of the La Mafia, but a lot because of how the LGBTQ community was viewed at the time. So the riot itself occurred on early June 28th of 1969, when police raided the Stonewall Inn for a routine raid and arrested 13 patrons and staff. One quote from History.com states, "At one point, an officer hit a lesbian over the head as he forced her into the police van. She shouted to onlookers to act, inciting the crowd to begin to throw pennies, bottles, cobblestones, and other objects at the police." So a lot of this was retaliation for the things that had happened to the community before, and people were tired of being mistreated. So the riot mostly included the police versus the bar patrons and staff and the surrounding citizens. A lot of people know the name Marsha P. Johnson. She was a transgender woman and a self-identified drag queen, and was noted as a key figure in the riot and the activism surrounding it. So some people think she threw the first brick. No one actually knows who started the riot. A writer from the Village Voice, which is a fairly liberal newspaper at the time in New York City, was also present and later wrote an account of their experience. People rioted, like I said before, was in retaliation of both police harassment of people that go to the bar and the whole LGBT community. Stonewall is often cited as the catalyst for the gay liberation movement. A lot of organizations that had existed prior shifted from more sanitized and quote-unquote calmer activism to less covert and more out there activism, and new organizations formed such as PFLAG and GLAAD to help advocate for the LGBTQ community. And 1 year after the Stonewall, the U.S.'s first Pride Parade occurred when they marched from the Stonewall into Central Park on Christopher Avenue. Today, organizations such as GLAAD and the Trevor Project still exist and still advocate for the community. Same-sex marriage was legalized federally in 2016, and a lot of states are passing legislation to expand the rights of transgender people. Former President Barack Obama declared the Stonewall Inn and surrounding areas a national monument in 2016. Thank you for watching.